The next arc of One Piece will be its last. We already know that the arc after Elbaf has been confirmed to be Laugh Tale by Oda himself. In the 2026 Jump Festa, Oda stated that once Elbaf concludes with a bang, we are on to the island that only the Pirate King ever reached, aka Laugh Tale. But that doesn't mean that we will then have a quote-unquote final war arc after Laugh Tale. Rather, the Laugh Tale arc is the final war arc. The race to the One Piece and the battle over the One Piece are set to take place in the same climactic storyline, with all factions on the seas converging upon the destined island to battle it out for the treasure that holds the fate of the world. And Oda has been sneakily setting up this final battle royale at Laugh Tale all the way from the beginning of the story. So as shocking as it may sound, today we're going to be breaking down exactly why all signs point to us genuinely being one arc away from the end of One Piece, why the final war and the race to Laugh Tale are in fact going to be the same thing, and how all threads are coming together for One Piece to conclude with not only the greatest war in fictional history, but also the craziest race to the finish ever seen in storytelling as well. So before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. But before we get into it, don't watch this video without first cracking open a cold one. Hopefully that joke didn't make you peace out, because we've got plenty more where that came from. We've got stickers from all across the world of One Piece that you can use to decorate your laptops, your water bottles, your forehead, whatever you want. Well, maybe not your pets. Whether you're looking for beautiful renditions of One Piece art or some aspirational messages for yourself, you can get all these stickers and more from One Dream Studio. And for this month only, if you buy 2 sticker sheets, you can get another 2 free. Just hit the link in the description below to get the raddest One Piece stickers in existence. So that aside, at this point, it's very clear that the final war is about to begin right after Elbaf. Not just because plot-wise Oda has set up Elbaf as the clear transition point to the final war, but because thematically that is entirely what the Elbaf storyline is about. Focusing just on the plot first, Egghead Island concludes with Dragon announcing that the war for higher ground is now going to begin, which makes perfect sense as the world has seen the water levels begin to rise, and now everyone has been put on high alert that getting to higher ground is absolutely necessary for survival. Even if not every nation believed Vegapunk's claim, the fact is that Vegapunk's speech sowed doubt and fear in at least many nations throughout the world, setting things up such that even the slightest trigger will launch the world into a bloody frenzy for survival. So right before Elbaf, we have this declaration that the war is about to begin. But on top of that, every faction in the world is now simultaneously making their big move. The revolutionaries, of course, have already begun their war against the Celestial Dragons. In a sense, the final war of One Piece has already started with their siege, and many nations are quickly joining in on it. But this is quickly set to become more than just a war between 2 factions, as last we saw, the Blackbeard pirates are now making their move as well, about to jump in on the revolutionaries and Celestial Dragons conflict at Marijua, and making a play for the ancient weapons. But at the same time, the conflict between Cross Guild and the Marines has reached a breaking point, while the red-haired pirates are officially going into action as well. Oda essentially set the world of One Piece up perfectly right before Elbaf as a tinderbox set to explode. And the final words he gives us before Elbaf begins is that the war is about to start. The narrative then steps away from this boiling pot into the seemingly peaceful bubble of Elbaf. But thematically, we are told from the start that the primary theme of Elbaf is war. This is spelled out for us from the moment we arrive, that this is Warland, and that the island itself represents the birthplace of war. So think about the narrative setup Oda has given us here. First, plot-wise, set the whole world into a frenzy, put all the pieces in place for chaos to explode, announce that war is around the corner, and then transition into an arc that is themed around the birth of war. Elbaf is clearly set to be the storyline that thematically segues us into the final war of One Piece, that Oda has been building to since the time skip. It's also precisely why the actual narrative of Elbaf has centered around the transition from peace to war, as the seemingly pacifistic land of giants learns to take up arms and welcome war again if that is what is needed to survive. This entire arc has been built around the idea of the inevitability and sometimes necessity of war, as that is largely the thematic point of Elbaf, and its placement in the narrative to transition us into the final necessary war to conclude the broader story. It also explains the concept behind Elbaf in general as a Norse-inspired island that is built upon a great tree, as Norse mythology revolves around the concept of Ragnarok, a final war at the end of all things that signals the end of the world. And as we know, the final war of One Piece is meant to bring about the end of the Third World. Many have even speculated that the Elbaf arc will end with the burning of the Adam Tree, as Ragnarok comes with the death of the World Tree in Norse mythology, and Oda has even been teasing the potential burning of the Adam Tree throughout the arc, even going all the way back to the foreshadowing from the Legoland segment. As such, both narratively and thematically, Oda has been setting up for the final war to begin immediately after Elbaf, with the conclusion of Elbaf likely even serving as a sort of transition into One Piece's version of Ragnarok, the war to end all wars. Yet at the same time, what's next for the Straw Hats agenda is continuing their own personal quest to Laugh Tale, and this is where the overarching conflict of the world and the Straw Hats' journey will finally blend together. So Oda has already outright stated that Laugh Tale is the next arc, and this is further supported by Oda promising that the encounter with the man marked by flames is next up for the Straw Hats, meaning the next key plot point will be regarding the final road poneglyph. As such, the logical progression of the plot from here for the Straw Hats should be obtaining the poneglyph from the man marked by flames and then embarking on the final leg of their journey to Laugh Tale. This seemingly keeps them uninvolved with outside events, even as the rest of the world is set to become embroiled in a great war after Elbaf. The Straw Hats are likely to ignore that and continue on to Laugh Tale. But the catch is they are not the only faction with Laugh Tale in mind. Right now we could consider there to be 6 main factions in the world: the 4 pirate empires, the revolutionaries, and the world government. 3 of the factions right now are seemingly only focused on obtaining the One Piece. The Straw Hats are obviously fixated on it, the red-haired pirates have announced their move for it, and even Cross Guild has declared the One Piece to be their new goal. None of these factions have ever expressed desire to rule the world or any interest in the broader war that is brewing. Now on the flip side, the revolutionaries are not interested in the One Piece. Their clear focus is simply on trying to win the world war to change the world order. Dragon doesn't even care that Robin left his organization, as he himself has no interest in the poneglyphs or the One Piece. And in the middle we have the Blackbeard pirates, who are interested in both the One Piece and in winning the war, as they've made clear that their true goal is world conquest, which is why they're gunning for the ancient weapons for that very reason as well. And finally, the world government seems like on the surface it doesn't care about the One Piece, only about winning the war, but at the same time we've gotten hints that the One Piece is important to Imu as well, especially as the Harley even shows that the devil, seemingly Imu, wants the sun for himself, and it's been established that whoever claims the One Piece essentially wins the war. And so what we're heading towards here is a merging of plot lines and goals. It's not going to be a race for Laugh Tale first, then followed by a big war. Rather, everything is converging at the same time and place. As the clearer it becomes that the One Piece is the centerpiece of the war, the more the conflict will shift into a mad contest between all factions to get to Laugh Tale first. Now, keeping that in mind, the way Oda has set things up, 4 of the major factions of the world are all set to collide in the Laugh Tale arc. Luffy, Shanks, Blackbeard, and now Cross Guild are all prioritizing the One Piece, and therefore aiming for Laugh Tale. And Oda has been distributing road poneglyphs left and right like candy so that the various emperors are all on their way to completing their collections very fast. Oda is essentially setting up Laugh Tale as a showdown for all these pirate emperors, and we know that this is the next arc up. But at the same time, what then is going on with the world government and the revolutionaries? Well, their war has already begun, but it doesn't seem like Oda is going to just have them duking it out in the background while all the pirates settle things between themselves in the contest for Laugh Tale. Rather, Oda seems to have promised one grand final conflict that will bring all of these factions together. And so the simple answer seems to be that while the race for Laugh Tale will initially be pirate-centric, as the broader war unfolds, Imu and the world government will cast their aspirations on Laugh Tale as well, as they will need to make a play for the One Piece to win the war once and for all. Remember, whatever the One Piece is, it has been established as having the power to decide the future of the world, and considering the fact that throughout the Harley, the sun is repeatedly referenced as an object of great power that changed the world and similarly cast the world into darkness when it disappeared, there is a strong chance that the One Piece is this sun, or the sun is a poetic way of referring to whatever the One Piece actually is. In the mural, we see a great war over the sun, with the devil representing Imu wanting to use it for himself, and the rest rest of the world fighting together to get it. Considering the return of the sun is what brings the happy ending to the third world, and the One Piece decides the future of the world, it does seem like the concepts are one and the same: get the One Piece, bring the dawn. So if we imagine the scenario of, on the one hand, the various pirate storylines focusing on them beginning the journey to Laugh Tale, while the world government battles the revolutionaries, and while presumably the various nations of the world begin to go to war themselves as the supposed battle for higher ground develops, the likely scenario we're heading towards is a turning point where Imu decides that the world government needs to chase the One Piece themselves to win the war and put an end to all hope of revolution. We even had this idea teased during Vegapunk's speech as the Marines began debating if they should go after the One Piece. Once the world government's eyes turn towards Laugh Tale, the Laugh Tale arc essentially becomes a war arc, as the revolutionaries' conflict with the world government will now then spill over to the world government's conflict over the One Piece. That then likely culminates in is a final battle at Laugh Tale itself, and this would bring together all of Oda's ideas in the story perfectly, because One Piece from the beginning was about a treasure hunt above all else. Over time, we slowly learned that there was something greater, an ancient war that had been going on that needed to be resolved so that the world could finally be freed. However, Oda was never going to betray his original core concept, that ultimately what mattered above all else was the quest to obtain the One Piece, and the final island where this would happen was always going to be Laugh Tale. And more importantly, Oda could not betray the nature of his main character. Luffy is a figure who is fundamentally unconcerned with the world at large. He will help those he comes across in need, but overall his focus has always been his own journey, getting the One Piece, and he has never wavered from that. He's not the type of hero who would drop everything to go save the world and win a 1,000-year-old war because it's his destiny or whatever. And so what Oda had to do to keep Luffy's core character concept intact was to make it such that Luffy's personal quest for the One Piece and the final war to save the world become one and the same. This is why over 1,000 or so chapters, Oda set up this scenario where this ancient war ultimately has to conclude with everyone, and that means absolutely everyone, competing with Luffy over the One Piece, such that Luffy will ultimately get to be the one to save the world, but not because his goal was ever to win some world war, but rather because winning the war just so happens to be a natural side effect of Luffy accomplishing his own personal goal of claiming his treasure. Just like that, the final arc of One Piece and the hero saving the world becomes something so much more unique and refreshing than a standard final war. It's both a personal pirate's treasure hunt and an epic battle with the fate of the planet on the line. Now, understandably, it may still feel like we are far away from the end of One Piece and it's too soon for there to be just one arc left, but that's not the case when you think about it. What needs to be remembered is the final arc is very likely going to be the longest arc in One Piece, at least the length of Wano, if not more. So while the notion of only quote-unquote one more arc can feel like we are scarily close to the end, the actual amount of chapters we have left is the equivalent of several normal-sized arcs. The only major events that truly need to still happen are the Void Century flashback, the Strahd's getting to Laugh Tale, and the final war itself, and all of these actually make more sense happening in the same arc than in separate arcs. As I've already explained, combining the Laugh Tale arc and the final war into the same storyline is the most elegant way to tie together everything One Piece has built up so far, and it makes the Straw Hats' final leg of their journey the most dramatic. The Void Century flashback naturally fits in here as well, as Oda has recently been following a pattern of dropping a major lore flashback right before the final battle of the arc. In Wano, we got the Roger flashback right before the Onigashima battle. In Elbaf, we got the God Valley flashback right before the battle for Elbaf began. And so it does seem like we're naturally set up for the Straw Hats to arrive at Laugh Tale as all factions converge on the island. The Straw Hats read the true history, thereby giving us the Void Century flashback, and this then immediately transitions into the final battle of the Laugh Tale arc as the fighting breaks out at Laugh Tale over the One Piece. Even in the broader story sense, there isn't any more setup for Oda to do after Elbaf. All the factions have their motivations and plot lines established. The world is in motion. The imperative to get the One Piece has been set, and now all that's left is to fight for it. It will likely take us somewhere between 20 to 50 chapters after Elbaf to actually get to Laugh Tale, depending on how long the Man Marked by Flames obstacle takes. Then the Void Century flashback that then transitions into a final battle that likely will take about 100 chapters if we assume double the length of the Onigashima battle. And so just like that, the end of One Piece is on the horizon, as Elbaf really is meant to be the beginning of the end. the arc that, from the start, symbolized the birthplace of war, as the end of this storyline will mark the birth of the final war, Ragnarok. So let me know in the comments below if you believe One Piece ends next arc, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like and subscribe. You can also listen to these videos by following me on Spotify, and if you want to hear my theory as to why Oda fundamentally structured Elbaf's narrative differently from all previous arcs, then you can listen to my weekly podcast that just dropped by becoming a member or by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below.